Good evening. My name is Pat Carabray, and I'm the director here at the Chan Center. Real pleasure to welcome you all here. Winnipeg, Oshtiniamaka, Vancouver, Niwakinikwa. So I just said a few words in Michif. I'm from Red River, and I want to acknowledge that we are gathered on the occupied lands of the Khmuthgwim people. For countless generations, these lands have been a place of learning and gathering, and we are really thankful to them for this opportunity to continue that tradition of sharing knowledge and ideas. I also want to take a moment to honor the late Phil Lind. Now, his vision and generosity has made tonight possible, and thanks also to his family for their dedication to keeping that legacy alive. Now, looking south of the border, it feels more important now than ever that we have this opportunity for open and fearless conversations. We are grateful to have some of Phil's family and close friends with us tonight, and your continued support for this initiative is really much appreciated. Thank you very much. The theme of this year's series is what it means to be American, navigating identity in a changing world. And tonight's speaker brings a crucial Indigenous perspective that challenges foundational myths that are part of American identity, like manifest destiny. And he uses his art to reveal how these narratives have erased Indigenous histories and whitewashed descent. Now, a few administrative details. We're going to be taking questions later using Slido. If you've been before, you know what that process is. If you haven't, you go to slido.com on your phone or whatever, and you enter the event code #Lind25, all caps. And lastly, just a friendly reminder to silence your phones. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator first. Is my friend and co-worker, Jarrett Martineau. Jarrett is a leading voice in Indigenous music, media, and cultural production. He holds a PhD from the University of Victoria and was a Fulbright visiting scholar at Columbia University. His research and writing examines Indigenous art as an emergent form of political communication. Now, he is also the head curator here at the Chan Center. Yay, Jarrett, for the great work that you do. As well as being the host of CBC's award-winning radio show, Reclaimed. Jarrett is Niahau and Denisoline from Frog Lake Cree Nation in Alberta. Our guest speaker tonight is Raven Chacon, composer, performer, and installation artist. He's been awarded both Pulitzer Prize and a MacArthur Genius Fellowship. Raven creates powerful work that challenges the American colonial legacy. He was born in Fort Defiance on the Navajo Nation, and his practice pushes us to rethink the narratives shaping our world. Hailed by the New York Times for works grounded in the politics of history and place, his Pulitzer Prize-winning Voiceless Mass confronts the silencing of Indigenous voices. It was performed in Vancouver by the Vancouver New Music in 2023, so maybe a few of you were able to attend that performance. Before we invite Raven and Jarrett onto the stage, we're going to begin with the performance of horse notations. Now, the source material for this music comes from an 1874 Popular Science Journal article with the title, "The Paces of the Horse." And it uses this kind of old-time invented analysis of horse gaits, some graphic notation to look at the walk, the trot, the canter, and the gallop. Raven creates the rhythms, the drum patterns, the bow pressures, and the volume arcs for this music from this source. So please join me in welcoming Jasper Wood, Jaewon Bang, Ryan Davis, Eric Wilson, Paolo Bortoluzzi, and Sasha Levin. This is Horse Notation.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Here we are between a fern and a fig tree. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight, Raven. I think given that the piece that we just heard, I'm sure, I don't know how many of you have seen previous performances of it or are aware of it. Let's talk maybe a little bit about the notations. I'm curious about your experience of both witnessing that performance and also if maybe you could talk about a little bit about some of the way that you build the score for a piece like what we just experienced. Like, was that what you expected to hear?
Yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Patrick and UBC, for not boycotting me for being an American product. unwilling American product. And it was, I hadn't heard that piece in a while. It was, as Patrick mentioned in the intro, inspired by this article I came upon by Popular Science magazine. And the issue was in 1870-something. And it was an article called Paces of the Horse. And so I wrote this piece. I was spending some time on the Umatilla Reservation at the residency Crow Shadow, which is a fantastic printmaking studio on that res, and was also commissioned to write this piece of music. And so I was thinking about the Umatilla's relationship with the horse, and thinking about how this biologist for this article had made these notations to try to represent this animal time, and how it put it into this kind of grid. And just thinking about, just time. I mean, that's really what music can speak about the best. And wanting to think about how an animal sees the day and its own motions through the day, and try to see what happened if notation can be that filter for music. The last time I heard this piece, actually, was in Albuquerque, in my hometown. This ensemble did it. And it was, they made it through the whole performance except the last movement. Much smaller venue, somebody's car alarm went off outside. Very, precise. Another kind of motorrhythmic meter, happening. And I wasn't mad though, because it was like the automobile replacing the horse, and telling that epilogue to this story I was trying to tell with this piece.
What's it like for you in your own process around composition? I mean, I think for those of you how many people are familiar with Raven's work here? Some of you, maybe, yeah. I've known of you and known you a little bit over many years. I've seen your work evolve over time. There's many forms and places and iterations of the way that work manifests. Obviously, your work as a composer is one component of your creative world. You're also a performer. I'm curious about the process of building a piece. I mean, using horse notations are one of many other works in which you make. About how you're envisioning where the work goes and lives when you're at the first stages of the composition. Are you thinking about the experiential part of it being performed? Are you thinking about it from these kind of multiple vantage points of being both the author of a piece and also the audience's experience or the experience of the performers that are involved? How are you kind of like building the world around a new composition when you start making something?
Yeah, a lot of them start off with some kind of idea, like some kind of, like the horse notations is, so some concept, some source of inspiration, and also thinking about how I can talk about this through instruments. And so if it is a conversation about time or about place, maybe it's something very site-specific, then finding the sounds that might link to that or relate to that. And so it's always different, but they always tend to be kind of puzzles, trying to mediate the instruments into relaying this concept. And also, the human is involved in this. Otherwise, I'd be making this for a computer, which I rarely use for making music. But thinking about then this other filtering that's going to happen once it gets, once people are involved and how their bodies interact with that instrument. And this often leads to these kinds of gestures that are going to produce a sound that at least I've never heard before. And so a lot of it is this kind of, like patting your head and rubbing your stomach or whatever that is, where you're conflicted in your own body in how you work with your instrument. And I'm interested in seeing how, the outcomes of that, of those gestures inside of this. And the notations are just a way to, to communicate with the performer about what they're supposed to do. I guess the audience is in there somewhere, but really it's for the performers, a lot of this. And then if it extends to other people, I'm happy about that. But I don't know, when I was writing these things, I didn't intend there to be a lot of listeners. That third movement where Paulo is walking around with the flute, he's supposed to be walking around the audience. But I didn't envision this piece being played in such a big hall before, so they couldn't do that tonight. So yeah, I'm not saying I'm not thinking about the audience. Of course, sound emits and enters everyone's ears, but a lot of the information is in the document of the score.
And maybe scrolling even further back chronologically in terms of maybe building a little bit of a pathway to where we are now, and particularly where we are now at this stage of your career. And there's been so much wonderful and well-deserved recognition on a pretty significant scale, Pulitzer Prize, MacArthur Prize, et cetera. What were the sound worlds that first inspired you? Like, were there sonic sites of inspiration for you early on before you've professionalized this, built a kind of a creative and a professional practice that's connected to sound? Were there early sound sources or actual sounds that inspired you?
Yeah, it came about from three directions. My grandpa used to sing a lot of Dene music. He would sing all the time, all these Navajo songs. And from what I understand, some of these are really old songs that have been carried on, passed down, through our people. Other ones, I think he was making up on the spot and just improvising. And when I say he's singing, I don't mean that this was like a serious thing we'd gather around and listen to him sing. Nothing like that. He'd just be watching the basketball game and singing, or whatever, just walking around, driving, singing. And so that's one part of it. And then I used to love heavy metal music. I still do. But I was frustrated with it. People were getting too good at playing their instruments. Like, you had to be faster and faster. And for some reason, the distorted guitars got cleaner and cleaner with recording technology. Things started sounding more polished. And also the themes were just things I was not interested in. Much gory and, it started not becoming mythology anymore and started becoming just ugly. And I wanted things to get slower and more distorted. And so that's why I got interested in noise music and maybe improvisation. And then, when I was about 10 years old and the family moved off the reservation to Albuquerque, my parents met a woman, her name's Dawn Chambers. She invited my sister and I to have free piano lessons. And my parents made us do that because it was free. And my sister Nanaba, she didn't like it. She became a painter, but I stuck with it. And we both learned to read music through that. And that sent me on the trajectory of classical music, or at least working with classical instruments.
Do you draw a distinction between noise, and music?
Yeah, it's all music somehow. Yeah, definitely. I think what happened in there too was understanding that we all, maybe when we think about music, we prioritize melody. And that's normal. That's human nature, I think. You know, we all sing. I think that's the first thing we all do. That's the first thing the first humans did, was probably sing. And then they probably found some sticks and started making rhythms and other things. But somewhere in there I started wondering, what if we didn't prioritize melody or pitch, and started writing music that prioritized other things, like the timbre of the instruments, the rhythm or the time, and the volume. What if things were really quiet, or things were really loud, extremely loud? What if things were spatialized? What if the flute walked around the audience and it didn't matter what notes they played? It's not that I don't write the pitches in, but rather thinking about what other things, what other parts of the music we can activate. And so, yeah, I think noise is one of those parameters of music that eliminates pitch, or maybe it encompasses all pitches, all frequencies at the same time, and then you're dealing with volume, with the structure of volume.
Mm-hmm. Have you found that the exploration or the leaning into these sort of different ways of thinking about how people are encountering music that is maybe deprived of some of their easily accessible markers of what they would denote as musicality, like harmony, melody, et cetera, like you're saying? Do you feel like there's been an evolution in terms of how that's been received over time? Do you think people are more open to listening with maybe more open ears?
There's an example I give to my music students when I teach music, because there's always this discussion, especially with university music students, about tonality, atonality, dissonance. And I give an example about what we perceive as music or tonality. And I say, you gather around the family table because it's somebody's birthday, and there's a birthday cake, and you're all singing happy birthday, and none of you in your family are in tune, and none of you are on the beat, and none of you are singing with a beautiful voice. Maybe somebody is. And yet we know that as the tonal composition, happy birthday. But yeah, it's not following any of these rules, that we think are going to let it be some kind of digestible music. And so I think we are really seeking something else, and that's maybe this familiarity with something. The familiarity with, we know happy birthday, so we're not uncomfortable when it's severely out of tune. And I hope my music gets to that point somewhere.
The happy birthday of horse notations. That's considering we're talking about under the banner of the Lynn series this year around quote unquote American identity. I did want to read a quote from an interview, an article. This is from a couple years ago, where you say, Indigenous people who are within the borders of this country, America, are not necessarily in this nation by choice. We've conceded to being American because these are our homelands, and we want to remain in them, and the country has built itself around us. How do you think about your relationship to American identity, kind of in line with those parameters? Maybe now, and has that changed in the course of your life?
I mean, it's changed in the past month, right? It's like, I was visiting Hugh Gusterson's class before this today, and this came up too, this identity. And of course, when I go back to the United States, just to get back in the country, I have to say I'm American. if you live here, you have to do the same to come back into this country. And so, so you have to put on a mask. You have to shapeshift. And I think about my ancestors, a lot of Native people's ancestors, who also had to do that. You had to concede that identity, not just an American identity. You had to probably concede a Christian identity as well, or else you'd be killed. If you didn't become Catholic or anything else, you were something else. And so you became that, and you shapeshifted. But why? New Mexico, where I'm from, has been in the hands of a lot of different other nations before, since it was a native territory. It was Spain, it was New Spain, it was Mexico, it was a U.S. territory, then it was the United States. And someday it'll be something else. And so why is it us that have to shapeshift when the nations have been shapeshifting this whole time as well? And so, sometimes I say I'm American because you still have to identify as in that way. You have to speak the language of, the national language. Otherwise, they'll take you away somewhere else. But it's funny, I don't know how relevant this is, but I was looking at the graphic for this, and it has the stars that are on the American flag. But if you enlarge those too much, it starts to look like the Texas flag. And so it's like, there's these smaller identities inside of the country, or maybe it's trying to be something else already. So like Texas doesn't want to be part of the United States either, but that's for other reasons. They want to be their own continent. So I don't know. I don't want. I got to be American, I guess. That's why it's in quotes. That's why I said yes to the gig, because it was like American.
Only because of the quotes. Yeah. I'm curious about maybe conversations you've had with other folks from your nation, because this is definitely something that comes up in my home community in Treaty 6 and in Frog Lake, which is about folks in the community, and I include members of my extended family, who would consider themselves proudly affiliated with the colonizing nation state, and those for whom they're like, we're Nehio, that's it, full stop. That comes first and before and above everything else. Are there sort of similar conversations happening back home for you? Are there people who are you kind of in dialogue with folks where there's that similar kind of tension around what it means to establish this sense of belonging both to your own nation and then also to maybe even the changing face of the nation that's decided to rename your homeland?
Yeah, I think, in previous times, from what I gather, I think there was, with some of our Native people, an assumption, that, or at least the belief that we are still sovereign nations inside of the United States, and that we could exercise that on the level of how the states exercise their own sovereignty. And that, in a way, the United States would honor and protect that, and in turn protect us. And you also have Native people who go and serve in the military. And, that always confounded me as well. But I was talking to somebody, it was actually a cousin. I said, why you want to sign up for the military? And he said, ultimately we're still protecting Deneta. We're still protecting, our homelands here. And of course I said, well, what does that mean, going over somewhere else? And then we got an argument about it. But I understand that, you want to defend that place, that desert, against anybody. And so I can understand that as well. However, I think in recent times, I have noticed a lot of, at least people from my community, seeing that the nation is not going to protect them. Those people who were on that half, let's say, I don't know if it's half, but those people who believed in that are now, I think, questioning that.
I feel like I have to ask this question, even though, and I don't mean it disingenuously, but there's a thing when you get named the first ever Native American Pulitzer Prize winner, in light of the things that we're talking about our own relationships to positionality, even within our nations and our communities, it can get loaded with expectations really quickly, right? Both from within your own community and then also from outside. Have you experienced, or do you think about that in terms of kind of a burden of responsibility that follows from getting put out front, saying, hey, you're the first of this, and therefore that comes with it some even implicit set of responsibilities or expectations around what you're supposed to do by virtue of being put out front in that way? Do you feel those pressures? Do you think about that?
No, not so much. I still don't think everybody understands what it is I do exactly.
That helps. Yeah.
But I've gotten feedback from the president of my nation, who said some really nice words of encouragement, and it reminded me that I am a teacher to young people in my community. So to me that is important. Younger generations, people my age, I don't care what they think. I'm from a big tribe too, the biggest one, yeah. If you don't count Cherokee. Second to Cherokee. So there's a lot of variety, I should say. There's a lot of different ways to look at the world, and I think we pride ourselves on that, our people. And what came with the Pulitzer too was I didn't get that award for just any piece. It was a piece that was critical about the church, the Catholic Church, all Christian churches, and their role in abuse in the residential schools that they collaborated with, and also their resulting in the loss of our languages. And so that's what this piece, Voiceless Mass, was about. And so what that has been able to do is at least bring it to attention, our histories, to an international stage. And so I'm really happy that is the reason I got an award, not just because I wrote something that sounded like New Age music.
How many times has that piece been staged? I mean, I think it was Patrick said in the introduction that there was a performance of it here in Vancouver in 2023, I believe, with Vancouver New Music. Was anybody here for that performance? A couple folks, yeah. And the first piece was in Wisconsin, right? Is that right? When it premiered and as it was commissioned. How many times has that piece been performed, or where else maybe has it been performed?
It's been played, I think over 20 times now. And before the Pulitzer, I expect these things to get played once. I thought it was going to be, just be performed at the premiere in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And now it gets played in church all the time. And I'm really happy about that, because it's bringing this conversation to the scene of the crime. Yeah. And that was the idea. It can only be played on church organ. And I'm happy to say, even though I wrote the piece about that history, it was not solely for finger pointing, even though I had no idea in my wildest dreams I'd be able to have these conversations with priests and different leaders of these different churches. But at these new invitations, I'm receiving, acknowledgement of this history, and I've been invited to have panel discussions with different, ministers and deacons and other leaders, and it's been an opportunity for them to apologize for, in any way they can, for their role in this history.
When you were first commissioned to make the piece, as I understand it, and maybe you can talk a little bit more about this, it sounded like the piece itself was kind of emergent from the location of where this commission was going to take place. Like, did you know that that's where it was going when you were first invited to write the piece? Did you have a kind of a sense of where and how it would take shape?
Well, yeah, I've told the story a bunch, but I'll tell it for you all. So the invitation came from this organization, Present Music, who I wanted to work with. When they asked me to write a piece, and I said, oh yeah, I'd love to write a piece for you. But then they said, okay, well, it's for our annual Thanksgiving Day concert. And it's like, come on, like, wait a minute, you know. And I have nothing against Thanksgiving, like some other Native people do, rightfully. You know, that event, mythological or not, happened on the East Coast. I had a different group of people we were battling in the Southwest, you know, different encounters. But, you know, and I like to eat. I like to see family on that holiday. But my main beef with that was Native people only get invited to do things on Thanksgiving or Native American month or whatever, you know. The rest of the year, they don't call us. They just want to fill that gap because, oh my God, we're doing a Thanksgiving Day concert and we don't have a Native person on it. So I was about to say no. And then I said, well, where's the gig? And they said, it's in the Catholic Church. It's like, oh my God. All right, I got to say something now. And that's where it came from. It's very site-specific. It was very day-specific. You know, I wasn't just going to write anything. It had to be addressed. If they want the Native person on the concert, well, I'm going to write a piece about the Catholic Church.
How do you make determinations about where your work goes? Meaning, not where the work goes out and circulates after you've written it, but because so much of your work, for folks that aren't familiar necessarily, is so site-specific. It's based in the places where you're making it, either within the parameters or the framework around the material conditions available to you in terms of the making, the history of the land and the place where that work is getting made. In the case of the church, the physicality of the church, the organ, the history of that space, both in its specificity in Milwaukee and then also more generally, of course, as an institution and vehicle for colonization. How do you make those decisions around like where you want to go and work next?
Yeah, a lot of work these days gets made because of an invitation. I'm not seeking gigs for Voiceless Mass, though it'd be amazing to do it at the Vatican. We'll see if they call. They might not call. But no, I think it's usually a collaboration with somebody who wants to invite me to participate in an exhibition. You know, of course, that's going to be somewhere. So a lot of the work is to do the research of that history of that place. Or if it's tied to like an institution or a building or anything else, then yeah, just finding out more about what I can speak about. And even just seeing if there is a way to do this with music or instrumental music or sound, because that's the main medium I work in. But yeah, it's not always, it takes a lot of work, and it's usually, working on something for a year or more to develop this. But yeah, I mean, there's other projects that I am interested in doing, and most of those are around my home territory. Talking about New Mexico, because this is the place I know. This is the place that I am from. I am a product of that place, and that history, and that violence in that history. And so, to me, it's very important to me, and I don't feel like I'm going somewhere else and telling someone else's story when I do that. I think that's the danger of working so site-specifically is the pitfalls of being that parachuting social practice artist.
You said before, and I don't know if this is sort of a definitive line that you've drawn across the extent of your creative practice, but you've said before that you've kind of like limited, I don't know if this is even the correct terminology, but you've excluded, let's say, Navajo music from your own compositions. Like in terms of drawing it as source material, is that an accurate or a fair characterization? And maybe if so, how are you making that determination around what parts of Diné culture kind of like move into what you make, and what parts are you kind of delineating as keeping separate?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's more subtle than that. I think sometimes there's an expectation that somebody's going to hear a Navajo melody or a rhythm or something that is used in a lot of our traditional music, and they're going to find that inside of my music. And it's not that I'm resisting it, it's that I have faith that it's still in there somewhere. Maybe the melodic line is now the amount of volume in a noise composition. I don't know. It's not so planned. I am who I am, and I'm going to make the music that is a culmination of everything I've ever heard in my life. But, however, it's not to say that some of the worldview or other concepts of that worldview don't end up in the composition or in the visual components of the score or in just the intention alone. Even just the process of thinking and dreaming about music has to come from somewhere. And I also have faith that that comes from the places that give us this knowledge. You know, all of us get knowledge from somewhere. And I think somebody gives me this through those means.
One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking about this is about maybe maybe not even intersection, but the relationship between composition and improvisation. And I think about this in the context, again, of like my own cultural context. We have like a lot of things that we do ceremonially, culturally, even musically, sonically, that have to be done a very specific way. And at the same time, there's inevitably and almost intentionally always a whole part of that runs simultaneous to it that feels like it could go off the rails at any moment, and it's totally free form, and people are interjecting and kind of disrupting the proceedings at all times. And there's like always the improvisatory element is the part that makes it hilarious and enjoyable, and in a way kind of brings us back into the process of the things that need to go by the book. How much of like improvisation and maybe composition, how's that relationship for you? And given that a lot of your performance-based work is improvisatory, how do you think about those two ideas kind of in relationship to each other?
Yeah, I try to keep them separate. I mean, a lot of the chamber music scores, they're either very precisely notated with classical notation, Western notation, with some extensions that I've made, you know, like to bow the violin. In horse notations, there's like a circle or a spiral in it, you know. And so that, however much that's improvisational. Of course, I pulled the actual graphics from the Popular Science article for the drum beat that the drummer is playing. I don't consider that improvisation, but it allows a fluidity that's going to be present more than just having the specific triplet notes and quarter note. But yeah, I think as even graphic notation, text notation, they open up an invitation as a prompt. So I think the possibilities of where that score is going to go are still going to have roughly the same outcome, even as different as you know the variations could be. For instance, I have a composition called "Scream Out of Each Window," and the score is just a text score asking for a family to go inside of a tall building and scream out of each window. It's kind of going to be the same every time, depending on where that family is from and how much they like each other. Or how happy they are that day. But, so that's why I perform separate than that, without a score. I show up alone or with other people. Those other people I either know very well or I don't know at all, and we just play music. On top of that, I show up with an instrument I either know very well or don't know at all, and I play. And I think there's power in the unwieldiness of that situation that is going to create a true improvisation. And again, I have faith in that, unless it goes wrong. But I think, I think that's what listening is for. Listening is crucial for improvisation. Knowing your own body, your own hands, your own tendencies, your own things you fall back on, your own things that you fall back on too much and you don't want to ever do again. That's what improvisation is. And so that's why I make noise, because you can't tell.
I want to talk a little bit more about the education work you're doing, and in terms of even just thinking about who the work is serving, and if you've abandoned trying to convince anybody of your own age or older of anything in particular, but there's an interest in terms of relaying at least some ideas or things you've learned from your practice. Can you talk a little bit more about that educational work and maybe what you're seeing the temperament of younger folks are in relationship to particularly younger Indigenous composers and musicians? How are they feeling about entering into this world?
Yeah, I since 2004, I've been doing a project called the Native American Composer Apprentice Project. And what it is, well, I don't do it to this degree anymore, but it would entail that I drive around to 5 different schools on my reservation, but also the Hopi Reservation and Salt River Pima reservations in Arizona. And over the span of a week, over the span of a month, with 4 weeks, 4 schools, teach 30 kids how to write string quartets. And some of these kids, about half the kids, don't know how to read music because there's no music teacher on the reservation. The other half read music because they have a music teacher. The reason they have a music teacher is because they have a really good basketball team or football team. So they needed the pep band, the marching band. And that's the only reason these kids read music, is because the basketball team is killing it that year. Either way, I teach them to write a piece. But the challenge is not teaching them to read in music notation or to write in a classical style. I tell them they can write in whatever style they want. If the kid loves hip-hop, they can write a piece in that style. I tell them it doesn't have to sound like classical music. But the challenge is to reinforce the idea that I'm not trying to force them into some kind of mold or style. And I think that's truly what the lesson is that they can do whatever they want with the string quartet. And so, yeah, I've been doing this project. I think it's resulted in about 300 scores by now. But I don't do it so much anymore because I have students now, former students, who teach it instead of me. So I'm really happy about that there's been a continuation of this education with them. But I don't know what their interests are. They're way younger than me. I have no idea what they're into. I do know all kids, all young people have way more access to music than those of a later generation did. I mean, you can pull up anything. I could not imagine if I was 15 years old and can listen to any song that is available out there in the digital universe. So I have no idea what kind of music will be made in the future from any young person living on this planet. It's hopeful, though, that it's become more equitable, given how much access they have to the internet, for better or worse, that the potential is there for any young person to make some kind of bedroom recording. And that wasn't the case when I was growing up on the res or in rural New Mexico.
A lot of your work you use, I mean, we've talked a little bit about this in this conversation, but there's such a wide range of sound sources that you use in the work that you make. I'm going to forget the titles of the pieces or the works, so you can help me with that. But thinking about compositions that use foghorns or deer antler or firearms as exactly, yeah. In terms of the kind of way that you build the palette for a piece, both how do you make that decision, and also what are some sound sources that you haven't used yet you're thinking about bringing into the work to come?
Almost all of the time, the sound sources are chosen not because of their sonic properties. I have a composition for chopping wood. I don't think that's that interesting of a sound, but it's there for the theater of it. What does chopping wood mean? Is chopping wood the building of ships, the building of colonies, the tearing down of colonies, the tearing down of ships? What is it? I chose firearms as guns as a sound source because they're as loud as you can get. It was another study in volume or lack of control of volume. But I realized when you shoot off a gun somewhere, that in the echo of that gunshot, you hear the land itself in that decay of sound. All of the information of that place is inside that echo after the gunshot. The foghorns, they do sound cool, actually. But it's more about the ships. What are the ships bringing? Where are they coming from? What or who are they bringing? Where are they going? What do they leave? What's the value on those ships? What was another one? Deer antlers. I started using a deer antler on glass. That was another one. That was pretty cool. It sounded good. The shriek of a deer antler across a pane of glass. But it was more to think about hitting a deer when you're driving and what that would sound like if that should happen. And it's kind of like the paces of the horse. It's not the deer's fault for going its own speed across the highway. It's your fault for driving too fast. And so maybe somewhere in there is the sound of that encounter, of that collision. I write for violins and stuff too, clarinets. I like bass clarinet a lot.
I wanted to leave some time for some questions, and thank you all for those who've submitted some, and you still can using Slido. One of the questions that came up was around a voiceless mass, and when you were first invited to produce this piece for Thanksgiving, as you talked about, and I don't think you talked about this tonight, but was the church accepting of the idea that you proposed, or did this the question was did you surprise them with this direction in terms of the piece?
Both. It was commissioned by the United Church of Christ, the piece. They didn't know what I was going to do, though. The United Church of Christ is a very progressive church. The church itself, though, is a Catholic church. When it won the prize, the United Church of Christ folks were really stoked. The Catholic Church didn't let us back in there to record the album. But eventually we did. We got back in. So, yeah, I mean, all this to say that it's produced dialogue, and that was the point. That was the intention, was just that some conversation would result from the piece. And I'm so honored that instrumental music was able to do that and continues to do that with this work.
this maybe follows a little bit, but it's a bit of a leap, but it brings us really to the present moment, which is a question around the takeover of cultural institutions that's happening right now in the U.S. And the question's asking specifically about the Kennedy Center and the current administration's takeover of the Kennedy Center. And does that worry you? And what does it mean for Indigenous art?
I didn't have any gigs lined up for the Kennedy Center anyway. They haven't invited me to do anything. No, of course it's scary. I mean, it's pretty bad. But all of it. We'll see what happens. Where I've been most concerned is the defunding of tribal colleges, because I currently teach at the Institute of American Indian Arts, and we rely on federal funding for that program. So yeah, obviously a lot of this is under attack. It's been under attack, like I was saying before, with the reservation schools. There's no arts programs in these schools, and it's not limited to the reservations. There's inner city schools. They don't have art teachers, art programs, music programs, and so it's been in a state of catastrophe and crisis for a long time. But yeah, I mean. Yeah, there's not much to say. I mean, it has been bad, and it's gotten much worse.
One of the other questions here is around the role of, there's a few that are kind of in line with this, so maybe I'll try to amalgamate them a little bit, which is around the role of non-Indigenous people in terms of both allyship, solidarity, joining in efforts towards notions of reconciliation. And one of the questions asked about, would you like to see non-Indigenous people putting an effort to learn Indigenous languages where they live? Do you think there's a responsibility on the part of non-Indigenous folks, no matter what territory they're in, around that responsibility to learn about Indigenous culture where they are? Is there a line that crosses over into appropriation?
Is this a Buffy St. Marie question?
My goodness.
There was the most profound experience. One of the most profound experiences I had in the past 10 years or so was the gathering at Standing Rock with water protection. And we think that people are unaware of what's happening in our communities to our Native people, and I got to say, being an American, how inspiring everybody in Canada, First Nations and non-First Nations allies, have been in making the world aware of the things that are happening. Murder and missing Indigenous women, the residential school abuse, Idle No More, all of this. I believe it inspired what ended up happening in North Dakota with not just Native people, but allies from all over the world coming and joining that encampment. And so when I was there, it was bizarre. I mean, it was surreal. It was surreal because there were just a wide variety of people who were there with a good mission. Also, the amount of people who were there for party time, Burning Man, and this being its own surreal collision of people gathering on Native land under Native guidance. And so you didn't see a binary there. You saw every possibility of intentions coming together and learning from each other. And so, to me, it was a beautiful, again, surreal moment that I think doesn't occur very often. So that allyship, I think, is important. Because if it wasn't for the non-Native allies there, I don't think it would have gotten the attention that it did. And it might have even turned violent, and nobody would have heard about it. So, yeah, I think it's same with Voiceless Mass. I think, we're only preaching to the choir if we try to keep these things internal. And a lot of this work we can't do ourselves.
this maybe extends from that a little bit, which is there have been a couple questions that are about borders. One quoting Omar El-Akkad, the writer, in his book, What Strange Paradise, where he says borders are a European disease, and asks if you can talk about what this means in the context of Dene homelands, your own people, and maybe a related question, which is about connecting some of your work with post-commodity and a work like Repellent Fence, which is also interrogating some of the tensions around what it means to delineate borders in certain ways, particularly on the part of the state. Can you talk to me about your own experience and your from a Dene perspective, kind of around that idea of the bordered existence?
Dene people, and a lot of Indigenous people, our creation stories talk about borders. Don't go over that river. This is our side of the river. Don't go to that other mountain. That's not our mountain over there. We are defined by borders. That's okay. It might have helped us survive. But obviously, you know, we've and we don't know how peaceful or not peaceful that history was of those older borders. But we now have the very militarized, extremely racist policy, especially in where I'm from, the southwestern United States. And where this comes in conflict is that it doesn't recognize the indigeneity or the paths of indigeneity that existed in that region before. So a lot of post-commodities work, primarily a piece called Repellent Fence, was speaking about this, that if we're talking about our older borders or our older relations, that we want to acknowledge those. We want not only acknowledge those, we want to revive those. And so saying that we have relatives on the south side, just over the, in Sonora, the same Sonoran desert that is also in Arizona, we have relations there. And how do we open that back up? And so we made this piece, though, as a guerrilla intervention, just to make that point. What we didn't realize was the very act of making the piece happen involved these community relationships on both sides of the border. And in a way, enacting this pathway that had existed previously. Yeah. I don't know what else to say about the border. It sucks. There's a border on this side too, and we'll see what happens there. But, the hope is to be able to exercise, that crossing. So I know a bunch of you don't want to go to the States. I'm going to boycott going to the States. But the Native people should be going back and forth. Just do it like 5 times a day. Why not? What are they going to do, send you back?
I like the idea that with the piece and also with the way you're describing that one of the things you're reminding, I think, all of us is that the borders as given were not always given, right? They're not, the current version of how this homeland and the larger continent that we share has not always been delineated in the way that it is now. And I think even as so much of your work does, making visible some of those histories that have been overwritten through the process of colonization is part of what makes your work so important and so profound. And I wanted just to take the opportunity as we're wrapping up here just to thank you for that work, to thank you for the ways in which it brings to light these histories and these stories, and I think offers just such incredible vision for what Dene creativity can be. So thank you so much for that, and thank you very much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Jarrett. Thank you.
Thank you all.